but to ask the Minister for help, because I don't know what else as an MP I can do to get justice, to get prosecutions and to get accountability when it comes to specifically grooming gangs exploiting children. I'm incredibly grateful to the hard work of South Yorkshire Police. The frontline officers have been exemplary in both listening to and supporting victims, survivors, parents and the broader community. But we must also accept that there is reputational damage to South Yorkshire Police by the past failings. They have yet to be recognised in full and they have yet to be resolved. I want a line drawn under this so that our police force can have both the respect and the trust that it needs. And I need the government's help to be able to do that. 5 years ago, almost to the day, on the 4th of February 2015, I had a meeting with the then Prime Minister David Cameron. I presented to him a 5-point plan for tackling this scourge. I just want to read the introduction to that. From my past experience in Rotherham, I'm convinced that we need a national strategy to tackle organised child abuse. Criminals do not observe local authority or police force boundaries. Locally, there are neither the resources or the expertise to tackle organised child abuse, by which I mean gang-related child sexual exploitation, institution abuse, paedophile rings and prolific abusers. Sadly, I am reading that today because the situation has changed very little. I'm incredibly glad and grateful that the government has brought in relationship education, and for me it's one of the proudest things I've ever campaigned on.
Well, what will Friend give way?
I will of course give way.
I thank Honourable Friend for giving way, and she's making an incredibly powerful speech, and may I also pay tribute to the work that she has done in her constituency on these incredibly difficult and complex and devastating issues, and in seeking justice as well for those who have been groomed. Could I also just draw attention to the point that she's just made about paedophile rings, who I think behave in ways that we cannot imagine, and who continue to pursue people that they have got in their rings as well as victims, even when they've gone to jail, and how the resources need to be made available to deal with this issue far more comprehensively than is currently happening.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The difference, though, between paedophile rings and grooming gangs is that the police actually have the research and the understanding to know what the motivators are. So a police force can look at patterns of behaviour, they can get ahead of the abuse because they see those patterns, and then they can disrupt. Sadly, for all the promises that the government gave, we have still not got that research about grooming gangs. That's one of the things that I asked for, and that's one of the things that I want the Minister to give me reassurance about. I'd like to refer to a letter that I sent to the then Home Secretary Sajid Javid. I've been working on this for a while. The reply came on the 6th of December. I quote, "Thank you for your letter dated the 3rd of September to the Home Secretary seeking an update on Home Office activity to understanding the characteristics of group-based child sexual exploitation. In your letter, you emphasise the need for research and the importance of sharing relevant findings with agencies tasked with protecting vulnerable children and young people in disrupting offenders. I recognise that the Home Office is uniquely placed to provide some of this insight, protecting operationally sensitive information where appropriate and necessary. Officials will consider the most appropriate approach in sharing this work and will advise the ministers, including the Home Secretary, in due course. I really hope that the officials have now advised the Home Secretary on something which is pressing up and down our country. I know that the government has committed to publish a national child sexual abuse strategy looking at all forms of abuse. I'm specifically talking about research to disrupt grooming gangs, and this should be published imminently. So I ask the government to give a commitment on timing, and also specifically about how that information is going to be shared nationally, and how the forces, the local authorities, the voluntary sector are going to be resourced so that they can actually use this data to disrupt this sort of behaviour. I now want to move on to the historic failings of our police forces. You'll remember 2 weeks ago, the Mayor of Greater Manchester published a report into Operation Augusta, which was about trying to disrupt and seek justice in relation to a grooming gang. The headlines from that report are shocking. The report found that police and social services failed the girls, that police resources were insufficient to deal with the issue. The girls were seen as prostitutes and somehow complicit in their own abuse. Greater Manchester Police dropped an operation that identified up to 97 potential suspects and at least 57 potential victims. 8 of the men then went on to rape girls. As recent as 2018, the Chief Constable refused to reopen the dropped operation. The following week, the IOPC released its report into one of the strands of its investigation into South Yorkshire Police handling of our past child abuse cases. I wrote to our Chief Constable, I quote, "The report's conclusions make profoundly disturbing reading. South Yorkshire Police failed the child multiple times, and by doing so led her to be exposed to long-term horrific abuse. It is particularly concerning that the report upholds a complaint against a senior officer and that it has not been possible for this officer to be identified. I am sure you would agree. I do not believe that it is possible for Rotherham to have confidence in its police force, while officers found to have failed so badly and with such catastrophic consequences are not held to account for their actions. I would therefore welcome your assurances that every effort will be made to identify officers involved and that any possible misconduct will be both investigated and action taken, including where appropriate disciplinary action is necessary." I've still not received a satisfactory response to that. I hope that I will be receiving a satisfactory response. This is not about a witch hunt. This is about restoring the confidence in our local police force. This is about the victims and survivors feeling that they have had closure, feeling that what they went through will never happen to anybody else. And so I ask the Minister, please, let's look at transparency, let's look at accountability when it comes to our police forces. I would also ask all of you here, including the Minister, to ask of your own police forces information on the caseloads of officers dealing with child sexual exploitation in comparison to those of other crimes. The number of dedicated child sexual exploitation officers who are PIP 2 qualified. The ratio of uniformed police officer detectives assigned to CSE investigations. The retention rate of investigating officers on CSE cases. And the average level of experience of officers assigned to CSE investigations. Let me say to all of you, if you do not think you have child sexual exploitation in your patch, you have. Ask these questions. Make sure that your forces are properly resourced to protect everybody within your constituencies. Thank you.